Hi, Ron here from L.T.L. Tutoring Central, and today I'm talking about clauses, independent clauses and dependent clauses, because you use these to form different kinds of sentences based on structure. And if you've taken one of my courses, my English courses, particularly those with grammar, you will have learned a little bit about sentences, sentence fragments, and clauses and how to use them. But this is to help clarify a little bit, or maybe this is the first video of mine you've seen, so it'll be a good introduction to clauses. And there's my website there, www.tutoringcentral.com. At the end of the video, you can look below, and there should be some links to the website, some courses, and possibly some other links as well. So the two different types of clauses that we're going to discuss in this video, again, are the independent clause, or sometimes called a main clause, and a dependent clause, or sometimes called a subordinate clause. Now, an independent clause can stand on its own, just like an independent child. It means that it's a complete sentence. Really, an independent clause is a complete sentence. You can use it by itself. Of course, you can add phrases and dependent clauses to it, but basically it could be left alone. A dependent clause is part of a main clause, or it depends on a main or independent clause. In other words, it cannot stand on its own. It's not independent. So here's a couple of examples of independent clauses. Theodore loves to attend classes. The cows ran to the barn. Now, I always say, if you walk up to someone, or if someone were to walk up to you and say the sentence, would it make sense? Would you understand, or would they understand what you were saying? So if I said, Theodore loves to attend classes, you know exactly what I mean. We're talking about Theodore, and we know what he loves to do. You're not waiting for any additional information, and there's nothing really missing here. The same goes for the cows ran to the barn. We know what the sentence is about. The subject is the cows, and we know the predicate is what they did was ran to the barn, and I'm not waiting for any further information really. Now here are some examples of dependent clauses. That she likes working at the clinic. Who has just won the award? Because he spent all his money. And at the bottom you see alert. These are not sentences. They're written as sentences. I've put a capital at the beginning and a period at the end of each one to show you that sometimes these can be written to look like sentences, but they are not really sentences. They're sentence fragments. They're dependent clauses that shouldn't be left alone. And another way of thinking about it, as I said before, if you walked up to someone and said, that she likes working at the clinic, the person would wonder what you're talking about, because we're missing information. Or because he spent all his money. Well, what happened because he spent all his money? We're still waiting for more information. We don't have enough. So this is not a complete sentence. And so it's not an independent clause, it's a dependent clause. It depends on further information. Now remember, independent clauses are full sentences, but dependent clauses are not. But we can take the dependent clauses from the previous screen and add another clause to it or some more information and create a full sentence. For example, Mary says that she likes working at the clinic. So here we have the noun clause that we had in the previous screen, and we've added Mary says and created a complete thought. Fred is the boy who has just won the award. Here we have the adjective clause, and we've added to it to make a complete sentence. Tom cannot buy the car because he spent all his money. So now we would understand this. If I walked up to someone and said, Tom cannot buy the car because he spent all his money, the person would know exactly what I meant by that. Here are some further examples of dependent clauses, but these ones are quite long and they really look like sentences. They can trip up a person. You can use them in an essay or report thinking they're complete sentences, and in fact they're sentence fragments. In other words, they'd be wrong, so you don't want to do that. So whenever the time comes to change direction in your investments, that sure looks like a sentence, but it isn't. The thought is not complete. What should you do when the time comes to change direction? We don't know. It doesn't finish. The other example, although she loved the opera and could never pass up an opportunity to go to the theater. Although, this word turns this clause into a dependent clause. In other words, it doesn't complete the thought. So although she loved the opera, etc., what else happens? We're still waiting for more information. So again, alert, these are not sentences even though they look like sentences. So you have to be careful with that. The following is a sentence. She loved the opera and could never pass up an opportunity to go to the theater. Well, wait a minute. Didn't I just tell you that this wasn't a sentence in the last screen? Well, I did, except we had the word although. That word turns this into a dependent clause. If we remove the word although, this is now a complete sentence. And without getting caught up in technical details, remember the idea of just walking up to someone and saying the sentence and asking yourself, would he or she understand what you just said? Or would he or she be waiting for further information? Well, without the word although, this sentence makes sense by itself. Now, of course, they may be wondering who you're talking about, but that's not an issue with this particular sentence. So sometimes one word can make the difference between a dependent clause and an independent clause. But be careful, just removing the one word doesn't always turn it into an independent sentence or clause. Why am I talking about all of these clauses? What difference does it make between independent and dependent clauses? Well, for one thing, you definitely don't want to be writing in sentence fragments. So you want to make sure that you're writing in complete sentences. But also, there are different kinds of sentences by structure. And here are 4 of them, and the different structures depend on which clauses you're using. So for example, a simple sentence would have 1 independent clause. A compound sentence would have 2 or more independent clauses. A complex sentence has 1 independent clause and 1 or more dependent clauses. And a compound complex sentence has 2 or more independent clauses and 1 or more subordinate or dependent clauses. Remember that subordinate and dependent is the same thing. And you would like to write with a variety of sentences. Try to mix up your different kinds of sentences by structure because it makes your writing more interesting. If you wrote all in simple sentences, your writing can sound quite choppy. And if you used all compound complex sentences, it can sound a little long-winded and maybe a bit confusing. So it's good to have a variety. Remember, variety is the spice of life. So mix up your sentences and use different kinds of sentences in your writing. To help you out a little bit further, I've included some very common words that introduce subordinate or dependent clauses. So often when you see one of these, you'll need to ask yourself, is this a complete thought or do I need to add something to it? Now there are many, many words, so this is certainly not a comprehensive list, but these are some really common ones that you'll use frequently, so it can be quite helpful. So you have that, which, where, who, whether, why, when, what, after, as soon as, before. And if you think of it, this makes sense. So although the boy liked ice cream, well, we can't stop there. We have to add something to it. While the plane was landing, what happened? We can't stop there. We have to add something to it. So you can tell that all of these words can sometimes be introducing a dependent clause. Hi, Ron again in a little larger version this time. And I just want to wrap up by saying, don't be afraid of writing. Keep writing, keep practicing, and keep trying. Don't let the terminology get in the way. Don't worry too much about independent, dependent clauses and all the different kinds of sentences. Learn them, keep practicing. If you have an instructor, a tutor such as myself, he or she can help you with that. But remember, the main theme of this video was to think about dependent clauses, and if you were to say a sentence to someone, is it a complete thought? Just ask yourself, will it make sense? Will they understand me, or does it need more information? If it needs more information, that means it's probably a dependent clause and you need to add something to it. So when you're writing, think about that. Looking at your sentences, each one, think, is this a complete thought? If I said this to someone, would that make sense? And that can really help you to avoid writing in sentence fragments, or in other words, writing in dependent clauses masquerading as real sentences. So just don't be afraid of it, play around with it, work with it, and keep on writing. You can subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'll be making more videos about writing and other educational topics as well. You can check out my website. There should be a link below, www.tutoringcentral.com, and there'll be some other links to courses and whatnot. So stay in touch. You can subscribe, you can like, you can make a comment. I can answer your questions here as well, or you can get in touch by email also. So again, my name is Ron. It's L.T.L. Tutoring Central, and I hope to see you soon. Keep learning.